Welcome back to the Obscurity Spectrum podcast. I'm your host, Jack Cunha, and
I'm your co-host, Mike. We are co-hosts, sir. Don't you pull that seniority crap on me.
Sorry, I get confused with my radio shows. Mm-hmm. Man, there's a lot of stuff I do on Adobe Audition here, so it gets a little confusing, Mike.
I understand. It's okay. I know that your mental capacity isn't too high. It takes a lot for you to process a little bit of information. It's okay.
Yeah. I need to get that upgraded very soon.
Just download more RAM.
Yeah.
Boom. There you go. Download more RAM.
What else would I do? But anyway, all right. So let's actually get into what this show is all about. And of course, as you know, we do the mainstream album selections first, and I just so happen to be the one presenting my selection first this episode. So, the album that I chose for my mainstream selection is called OK Computer by Radiohead, and this one is a really mainstream one. But it's really good. It's an album that was obviously influential to alternative rock and indie rock, and Radiohead really broke some interesting boundaries back in 1997 when they released this album. Right. So yeah, I'm curious as to what your initial thoughts are, Mike. What do you think?
So I'm going to circle back to what you said. It's a real mainstream album, and I will agree with that. And I think what's interesting about OK Computer is that what made it mainstream was that it kind of destroyed the mainstream that existed before, where you had that Britpop invasion of bands like Oasis. Yeah. For those that don't know, the Britpop wave was a rock movement, a softer rock movement in the mid-'90s that focused on Britishness. It emphasized Britishness, so
it had a characterization that's like, for instance, Oasis. You mentioned Oasis. Oasis is probably the absolute worst of the Britpop bands.
Yeah, I agree. And I love Champagne Supernova, but that's about it.
Oh, God, that song. God, Wonderwall. Anyway, here's Wonderwall. But, no, yeah. Radiohead, albeit they are British, but they have a very characteristically different sound from what was popular at the time, both Britpop and grunge, and they really changed the face of rock music as a whole. Because, for instance, their first two albums, they had the big hit "Creep," and their second album
Pablo
was
Honey, right?
Yeah. That was off of Pablo Honey, and then their second album was a step in a different direction, but it was still on the more mainstream rock sounding side, like post-grunge kind of thing. But OK Computer is characterized by a lot of different and interesting textural sonic qualities. For instance, I know
it's
Mike
like
loves this.
Alternative rock, it's art rock, it's progressive rock, it's ambient, it's a whole bunch of stuff.
Yeah, and I know, for instance, one thing that Mike loves is Mellotron, and they use the Mellotron quite a bit on this record.
Right, especially at the end of is it music to exit music for a film? Yeah. Yes. It ends out with a Mellotron chorus, and like Jack said, I'm a sucker for some Mellotron, so that made me excited.
Who isn't? And it's really cool how they use their influences on this album, and I know they were influenced by some of the progressive rock bands from the 70s that primarily used the Mellotron and everything. And what I find to be interesting is that after OK Computer, they actually moved. I don't know how much you're familiar with their album Kid A, but Kid A.
I know it's a lot more ambient and electronic.
Yeah, so everyone was thinking like there will never be a non-rock Radiohead album like that. That's what people were saying back in 1998 after OK Computer and Radiohead were in the process of making their new record. And then when Kid A came out, it's very experimental for I guess a band that was previously more on the mainstream side. And yeah, I think that's really cool because they went from I guess incorporating progressive rock qualities to being actually experimental and progressive in their music.
That's what's interesting about Radiohead is that you go to another album like The Bends, and then you have a Moon-Shaped Pool that came out a couple of years ago. None of their stuff really sounds the same. After I listened to OK Computer for this podcast, I went and listened to a couple of their other albums, or at least some of the considered highlights of those works. And I kept thinking to myself, there are these themes, there's this kind of Radiohead mood I still get from these albums. They just use completely different instrumentation on them. And it's kind of a shame because I do like Radiohead the most out of what I've heard from them. Kind of like with Steven Wilson, I will always love Hand Cannot Erase, but he started doing, he had done shoegaze, he did really dark progressive rock, then he did some pop rock, and now his new album's electronic. So I'm used to I'm used to an artist doing a sound, and then I end up loving it, and then the next album they're like, well, I hope you liked what I did last time because I'm sure as hell not doing it again.
That's how it goes. Honestly, I understand the sentiment of wanting a somewhat consistent.
I
was gonna go in the other direction, like a somewhat consistent sound, but at the same time, I am also one who enjoys the constant changing of sounds. Like for instance, Zappa, he never did one album that was alike another. Mr. Bungle, like their entire 3-album discography, excluding the new one, was just like every single album was totally different from each other, went in totally different directions. But yeah, back to OK Computer though.
Yeah.
OK Computer has a lot of really cool experimentation, but they never leave the realm of mainstream. They never leave the realm of something that wouldn't be consumer friendly. But that's also part of that's part of the theme of the album, is how they have to be kind of consumer friendly, and the whole theme of the album is kind of dystopian and
consumerism, social alienation.
Yeah, and I think it goes really well with the experimentation, and it kind of leads me to believe that Kid A is exactly what they wanted to do the entire time.
Right, and I feel that once they cemented themselves with OK Computer, they figured, well, now people know who we are, so let's do what we really kind of wanted to do all along. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I understand making an album that hints at what you want to do and then cementing yourself as an artist so that whenever you do change your sound a lot, people are still going to be willing to at least give it a chance.
Right.
And what's interesting is that I listened to this album once, a very long time ago, and this is going to be similar to one of our obscure picks that you and I both listened to in a completely new light. I listened to OK Computer, and something just kind of struck a different chord compared to when I listened to it 2 or 3 years ago. I love 2 minutes into Paranoid Android where they start picking the lower strings, and you have Tom York talking about politicians being little piggies and all that. I love that. I mentioned the Mellotron and exit music for a film. I had to get used to Tom York, his singing style, and I also had to get used to some of the more harsh effects he ended up using on his voice in a couple of the songs. But overall, it's a 90s sounding album without all the characteristics I dislike from a lot of 90s music.
Right.
Are you like me where you absolutely despise Nirvana?
Yeah, I'm not a big Nirvana fan, but I will say their 3rd album, I think, In Utero, that has some very interesting, whatever.
Yeah, whatever.
that has some very interesting. How do I put it? I don't love Nirvana, and I never have. But
I don't like Bleach and all that. I don't like Nevermind.
In Utero has some very cool ideas.
Yeah,
and I appreciate that album for what it is, in the same sense that I appreciate the experimentation of Radiohead, because it's kind of the same thing.
And it's funny because there are plenty of interviews where Kurt Cobain said, "I'm never going to apologize for making In Utero." Apparently, a lot of fans hated it because it wasn't the mainstream grunge that they had become known for. But so what's interesting is looking further down the line and seeing how many bands kind of followed the Radiohead sound, if you will, getting away from that Britpopness, because it seems like a lot of bands wanted to do that, but none of them had the guts to actually do it.
Oh yeah, Radiohead were the first, and I would honestly venture to say that until like 2008, 2009, OK Computer was the most influential album in rock music on the general sound of rock music. I would say that the influence of that album seeped into an entire decade's worth of music after it in the mainstream. And I say that because I also think that in 2009, when Animal Collective released their album Merriweather Post Pavilion, that album, like, I don't know if you've ever even heard of that album. Well, I know you've probably heard of it.
There was one episode where you had made me listen to Strawberry Jam or something by Animal Collective, the one with the smashed strawberries on the cover. And I listened to some Animal Collective, and then you ended up switching your album. But it sounds like we'll do an Animal Collective album eventually.
Yeah, I plan on covering Merriweather Post Pavilion eventually, because right now, currently, that album is one of my favorites, and that album has seeped itself into, like, if you listen to that album and then listen to, like, every indie band ever, it's like they're just trying to copy Animal Collective. Like, just that general, like, kind of psychedelic, experimental, synth-based rock indie stuff. And that's what I really enjoyed.
You're talking about, kind of like Foster the People kind of do.
A very watered down version of it, but yes.
Yeah. But it's funny that you brought it up again, because it kind of slipped my mind. But you talk about OK Computer setting the trend for what mainstream music would be for well over a decade, if not closer to two, probably more like one and a half. But a lot of people consider OK Computer to be the dark side of the moon of that generation. And I don't think that's an invalid critique in the slightest. I agree with it a lot. Not in the sense that it issued forth, this holy crap, this is going to be one of the greatest albums of all time kind of deal like Dark Side of the Moon did, because there was nothing like the success of Dark Side of the Moon except for maybe Sgt. Pepper by the Beatles. But what Dark Side did was it took that progressive rock sound that had been churning up in the late 60s and the early 70s when Pink Floyd had done like Atom Heart Mother and Metal. You had King Crimson's debut. You started to have Yes coming out with some stuff like Close to the Edge. You had Genesis about to make The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway and selling England by the pound. And then you had Dark Side of the Moon come and take this progressive rock sound and make it popular and very mainstream digestible. And I think OK Computer did the exact same thing, except nothing predated OK Computer that it would make digestible. It itself was the start of that sound. So I kind of think it may have done a little bit more than Dark Side of the Moon, because while Dark Side of the Moon cemented something that pre-existed it, OK Computer just completely set a new standard.
Yeah, and that's a really cool point. I definitely agree. I feel like Radiohead's OK Computer is kind of, not only is it a culmination of their influences, but it is also a left turn from the normal mainstream ideology that a lot of the other bands at the time would have. So yeah, it's a very how do I put it? it's digestible. It's a digestible album with experimental qualities and progressive qualities, and it has a very unique vibrancy to it. It's vibrant in the most desolate of ways, and I think that's exactly what Radiohead kind of envisioned for this album, because it's a beautiful album, and it's bleak, and it kind of just encapsulates that entire the unrest going on at the time, and I think it's just really good.
It's a very lush sounding album while still being able to be bleak and sterile. Not sterile from the sense of, it just sounds extremely bland, like nothing's going on. The actual themes and the mood of the album are very sterile and cold to me. Mm-hmm. And it still manages to have such beautiful textures to it, which is something I think very few albums have been able to pull off successfully, being extremely melancholic and dark while still being able to pull that off.
Oh yeah, I definitely agree. And here's an interesting question. Do you have a favorite song on the album?
Oh, exit music for a film.
Understandable. That's a really good song.
Understandable. Yeah, that was the first one you sent me before you even wanted to do this episode on the podcast. Or you wanted to do this album for the podcast. You sent me that probably a month or two ago when we were on that hiatus and said, I think you'll like this. It has Mellotron. and you were right. I ended up liking it the most because of that Mellotron chorus at the end.
Yeah, and what's cool about that song that actually isn't in, I don't think, any of the other songs, at least not to the same extent, but exit music for a film has such an intense, and it's like a very slow build up, but it really, really hits hard when it's at the point of I guess when everything breaks down at the end, and you get that really it's jarring, but it's also expected at the same time. I don't know how to explain that.
That sounds close enough to me.
But anyway, my favorite song from it is probably what I will play for the break, and if you don't have anything else to add, I can probably just go ahead and say.
Yeah. Well, nothing of importance. Go ahead.
All right, so I'm going to play my favorite song from the album, No Surprises.
All right, welcome back from the break, everybody. That was No Surprises by Radiohead, which is the inferior song on the album to exit music for a film, but we'll discuss that in the ratings. Anyway, so for my mainstream choice, I decided to pick the debut studio album by Donald Fagen called The Nightfly. Now, I've brought up Donald Fagen on the podcast before because he was the co-founder of Steely Dan. Mm-hmm. And unlike what happened with Asia, I think Jack and I are going to meet eye to eye on this one quite a bit, huh?
Yeah, honestly, where I found Asia to be kind of sterile and robotic, I feel like Donald Fagen on this album put a more personal and expressive touch on that. It's a similar sound, but he also brings it to a different level of variety. For instance, the songs on the album are various. They're not like one specific style.
Right.
And he also incorporates more synth sounds and just a lot of them. It's a more emotional and luscious quality to it. I don't know how to explain it, but
no,
it just,
you're 100% right. And you said it was a more personal album, and that ties into what I'm about to bring up perfectly. So on the original vinyl LP, on the insert that holds the record, there's a quote from Fagen saying, "The songs on this album represent certain fantasies that might have been entertained by a young man growing up in the remote suburbs of a northeastern city during the late 50s and early 60s. Per example, one of my general height, weight, and build." So it's basically, he basically says, this is what my fantasy would have been as a young kid if I was a late night DJ at that time. Hence the title, The Nightfly, and the cover is a black and white photo of him. And what's interesting is that Fagen didn't like to be photographed, and the fact that he put himself on the cover speaks to just how personal this album was to him. But he's sitting behind a microphone and a turntable, smoking a cigarette, talking into the mic. This whole thing screams, this is Fagen's perfect example of what he wanted to do if he had been a late night DJ at the time. Mm-hmm. And I'm glad you brought up the synths, because whenever this album opens with IGY, which stands for International Geophysical Year, which was the year in 65, I believe, when, we were supposed to have flying cars, the world's problems were going to be solved. It was that retro sci-fi kind of look to it. That song opens with some incredible synths, which I know you're a sucker for.
Yes, I love the synths on not only this song, but this entire album has some very, very cool synth parts. And also, Donald Fagen likes to incorporate a lot of organ on this album too, which I am a very big sucker for organ. Like, for instance, the last song, Walk Between the Raindrops. It's just, where I got Steely Dan, when I listened to Asia, and it's not that I didn't think it was a terrible album, right, but it didn't speak to me. It didn't speak to me in a way that I like my music to speak to me. But this record, it hit all the right notes. It hit all the right textures. And for instance, I'm a sucker for organ, and it just sounds more life. It sounds more, how do I put it? It has a better quality to it and has more life in it. The music just screams like this is alive and this is what you're listening to, and this is, it's a really organic record, and I never thought I'd be able to say that from just listening to Steely Dan. And I wouldn't have expected The Nightfly to pursue that kind of organic sound, as opposed to it's like almost the exact opposite of something like Asia to me.
Right, and eventually I want to do Gaucho on this podcast. Gaucho is what followed Asia, and Gaucho was the last Steely Dan album before they took a 20-year hiatus, before they made an album in 96. But Gaucho took all the hallmark studio perfection qualities that Steely Dan had become known for, but it still kind of broke the mold a little bit, where the music wasn't as sterile on Gaucho. And look, I love Asia for being a studio perfect album. I think Gaucho is their best work as a band, but I think The Nightfly is Fagen's best work that he's ever done. I hold this above everything that he did with Steely Dan. He was able to get the perfectionism that he achieved with that group, but without the Steely Dan name hanging over his head, he didn't have that expectation of what he was supposed to do. He made what he wanted. And that's why this album comes across so much more lush and organic, like you were talking about, than when he was working with Walter Becker.
Yeah, I can totally see that. And one thing I will touch on, and this is the only negative comment I would have about the album, is that the third and fourth tracks are just
they're covers.
And they're not my favorite. They're not my favorite on the album, but they are still pretty solid. They're good, right. And I don't skip them, but I also don't like them as much as the rest of the album.
No, I'm with you too. Those are actually my least favorite as well.
Like, for instance, IGY it's like one of the best openers, I'd say. That song might, like, if I were to say if that song on its own would be a 10 out of 10. I love that song. And then Greenflower Street is another really good song. And then if we skip past, tracks
Ruby
3
Baby
and
and
4, we have
Maxine.
New Frontier, The Nightfly, and also after that it's The Goodbye Look and Walk Between the Raindrops, which are two like very tropical sounding songs.
Yeah,
and they're
they
just
take a
so
very
uplifting.
Island theme. They're both about like tropical island vacations.
Yeah, and they have this kind of vibrancy to them. They have this life to them, and The Goodbye Look feels like I was reliving parts of my own life listening to that song because I related to it. And then Walk Between Raindrops is just, it's like the ending credits scene to the movie that is your life.
I completely agree. As much as I love IGY, and I put The Nightfly, the title track, just over New Frontier, even though they're both really damn good. But I think Walk Between Raindrops is my second favorite on the album. The bookends on this album, like you said, are phenomenal. They're probably some of my favorite on any album I've listened to. But Walk Between Raindrops, when that organ comes in the middle, that is such a killer sound that Fagen was able to get on this album.
It's very dense and very present, and it just sounds good.
Right. And I know you're not as big of a fan, like you said, of Ruby Baby and Maxine. I was incorrect, though. Only Ruby Baby is a cover. He wrote Maxine about, like a long-lost love affair where he was in Mexico. Ruby Baby's a cover. What's interesting is that at the end of Ruby Baby, you can hear a crowd in the background kind of chatting. They wanted to get a natural crowd talking without knowing that they were being recorded. So they tried recording the studio next door when they had a party, and it didn't come through well, so they just had a party in their studio and didn't tell anyone that they were being recorded. So that's just a little snippet. But
yeah, that's cool.
I can't go reviewing The Nightfly without talking about the Ultra Disc One Step.
Yeah, that seems to be a theme that's beginning on this show.
Oh no, oh crud, you're right. I am just doing Ultra Disc One Steps now. I may do Mingus Aam on the next one or Village Vanguard, who knows? But
not even Mingus's best album. Sigh.
Mingus Aam is better. But
no.
I digress. We'll fight about that one day. But so The Nightfly is held up as one of those albums like Dire Straits' Brothers in Arms, where it's considered like a pinnacle audiophile recording. If you are a hi-fi enthusiast and you're showing off your turntable system, you get one of these pressings. I believe they were both actually mastered by a guy named Robert Ludwig. And I'm going to go off on a quick tangent here. For those that don't know who Robert Ludwig is, he cut a copy of Led Zeppelin's second album where the bass was so hot that it caused cheap record players to skip, so they recalled it. And if you can find a copy, they're hundreds of dollars. So Robert Ludwig is a great mastering engineer, and he cut this album. And I had an original copy. It sounded phenomenal. And so, like I brought up on the last episode, Mobile Fidelity Sound Lab does these Ultra Disc one-step pressings, and they did The Nightfly. And what's interesting is that both Dire Straits' Brothers in Arms and this album are digital recordings, where they both are done on magnetic tape, but where usual analog magnetic tape, you just record the sound wave onto magnetic tape. Digital tape is just a series of ones and zeros. So people thought, how good can a digital recording really sound when you put it through this process that's supposed to only be for all analog recordings? Right. And I questioned it too, and holy crap, I shouldn't have questioned it. It really made a difference.
And I think it's just because you're at that level where you not only do you have the system for it, but you also have the ear for it. You have realized how much that makes a difference in your audio listening experience. And I think that is really, not only is it really cool, but it's something that I would also like to get into eventually as well when I am in a place where I can spend thousands of dollars on a setup.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I haven't spent thousands of dollars yet. My turntable is worth a couple of thousand. I bought it for a lot less than that. But yeah. My system's getting there to the point where I've had to train my ear to know what to look for, where if you have a stereo set up, you listen for that stereo image that gets produced by the system. You listen for instrument separation and detail, and you just train yourself to listen for certain things in audiophile recordings. And the Nightfly, both pressings are absolutely phenomenal. It's one of those cheap records you can find for $10, and it'll sound phenomenal if you play it.
Yeah, I have yet to pick up a copy, but I really want to, and I know they're not too hard to come by, so it'll be really cool when I do and test it out on my system. And I know for a fact I'll be jamming out to, the Goodbye Look and Walk Between Raindrops, because they're just like this album is a feel good album. Like it makes
really
me
is.
It makes me feel good listening to it. It makes me happy, and I really think that it's the best thing I've ever heard from Donald Fagen, for sure.
And I agree with you 100%. It's the best thing I think Fagen's ever done. And just to kind of give us a spoiler as to what the ratings are going to be, this has become my second favorite album of all time. So if you can't guess what's going to happen after this, that's your own problem. You should know what's going to happen in the ratings. But I'm curious to see what Jack ends up putting it at.
Yeah, I guess we'll have to see.
Well, to end out this section, do you have any other comments, Jack?
I have no other comments besides I very much enjoyed this album when I didn't think I would initially.
Considering how much I harassed you with videos of it on my turntable, yeah, he ended up liking it more than I thought he would, and that makes me happy. So to end out this section, I'm gonna play probably one of not my favorite song overall, but one of my favorite sections from the album, and that's a clip from The Nightfly.
All right, that was the title track from The Nightfly by Donald Fagen. And now we get into the obscure side of our tastes. And my pick today is an interesting one. It is called Fantasma, and it's by the Japanese artist Cornelius. And this album is one that is very, very dense. It's very... I know I've probably used this word 20 billion times in this podcast already, but it's texturally very nice and lush, and the opening to the record... Yeah,
you and I both use that a lot.
Yeah, because I think that's the best way to describe this album, especially because there are so many amazingly immersive sounds. Like, for instance, the opener is like kind of this trip hop kind of weird amalgamation of very lush sounds and also kind of sampled offbeat noises, but it works so well for the opening to this album because that kind of draws you in to what's to come. So yeah, Mike, I'd like to hear, I guess, your impressions on the album, because I know this is a different one than one that I've probably ever asked you to listen to. It's a very different animal.
Yeah, and it's the third album by a Japanese musician or group that you've pulled on this podcast. Hint, hint, don't do it again. No, I'm kidding. But what I got used to with like YMO and B2 Unit was that, they were both very electronically based. One was a lot more ambient and not lacking in detail, but it was a lot more open, a lot more sparse. But what was interesting about this one was that it was so much more compact than the Japanese artists I've listened to for this podcast, but it wasn't compressed, if that makes sense. There's a lot to take in, but it never feels like kind of smashed in. And like you said, it starts off with mic check, which I can hear him, like, whistling. I can hear him going mic check, and like eating a bag of potato chips or something, scooting the mic around. And then it starts going into this trip hop beat, and it really caught me off guard. And that's what brings you into the weirdness that is the world of this album.
Yeah, and I like how you describe it. It has its own world. Like it is a very unique experience because it takes you on this journey through this world in Cornelius's mind. And for instance, after Mic Check, the intro song, you get this like really weird, unexpected Disney sounding song. Like you're going through it's a brand. What is it? It's a
small world.
Yeah, it's a small world. It's like going through
that.
That's
what that is.
It's like going through that, but like actually not getting annoyed to death by the music in it.
Yeah, and you're exactly right on that. It does have a very whimsical feel to that. And then you get into more obscure stuff where he does the song Clash and then Count 5 or 6. Those were a little more experimental, whether it be from the instrumentation or the lyrics, or really lack thereof of lyrics, where like in the 5th track, he's just counting up and down. It's really kind of a roller coaster of different stuff. And I ended up enjoying it a lot more than I was expecting to.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that because I know I honestly didn't expect you to like this one very much, just because it's not at all like when I think of like your favorite kinds of music, I didn't think that this really aligned with that because it is a different experience. It's very like it has so many different genres that you just it's almost overwhelming, especially on first listen.
Yeah, it's kind of sensory overload.
Yeah, it took me a couple listens to really understand it and really get it and really enjoy it to the point that I did. For instance, the first song I ever heard on this was New Music Machine, which happens to be right after the second track, the Micro Disney Cole World Tour, that's the title of the track, which is pretty funny to me. But yeah, New Music Machine is like a hard-hitting shoegaze song, but it's also the harmony in the vocals and the melody is just very enticing. It's like if the Beach Boys were doing shoegaze.
That's such an interesting way to put it, but that sounds so horrifying to me. I'm just picturing Brian Wilson doing the opening to Pet Sounds. I can't remember what song opens Pet Sounds because I have the rhythm stuck in my head.
Wouldn't it be nice if we were older?
Yeah, that's it. Wouldn't it be nice? I'm imagining him doing Wouldn't It Be Nice as shoegaze. And that's just stupid. But to keep going, one thing that I meant to bring up to you before this podcast and have you listen to see if you could find the similarity was the song Magoo opening, originally titled Monkey, parentheses. Magoo opening, towards the end, there are these horn sections, and it sounds just like a song off the Cowboy Bebop soundtrack.
Huh.
And I need to send it to you and see if you can find it too.
Huh. Yeah, you'll have to send that to me because I admired the very weird, whimsical quality of that song. Like it was just so unexpected. I was like, what is going on right now? But then as I went on listening to this album even more, I was like, oh my god, this is like an irreplaceable track. I love this song so much.
Yeah, and we can keep going down the list. Every single song is pretty unique, and what it fits into is that Cornelius intended for this album to just be a complete cluster F of a trip where you have Mic Check kind of pulling you out of reality into this mindset where you don't know what to expect, and then he pushes you on the ground, kicks you in the stomach, lifts you back up, gives you a compliment, and then he pushes you back on the ground, kicks you in the stomach again. And then the title track Fantasma at the end brings you back down to earth and you're grounded again. It's really something else.
Yeah, and keep in mind that entire beat down was on acid.
Wait, what? He recorded this on acid?
No. I was saying.
Okay. I wouldn't be surprised. All my favorite music from the 60s, they were all either on acid or they were all on coke. Especially the
Yeah.
Rolling Stones. Oh my lord.
I would not have expected you to bring up the Rolling Stones in this episode, so let's ignore it and keep on going.
I'm sorry. No. You cannot just say ignore the Rolling Stones. That's gonna be
I know
another
you like
Steely
the Rolling
Dan
Stones.
betrayal. If I have us review Sticky Fingers or Let It Bleed, you're gonna hate it.
Let It Bleed is good, but my favorite by them is the album Her Majesty's Satanic Request. It's the only album.
Of course,
that I
that's your favorite. Of course, that's your favorite. I shouldn't be surprised. Continue with Fantasma. I don't need to go down this road because I'm going to be upset and leave.
But I also wanted to point out a very interesting song on the album. It's called Chapter 8, Seashore and Horizon, where I don't know if you noticed this quality about it, but it's like two songs cut in half and then stitched back together, and they go like back and forth between this like video game like dreamy sound to a like an upbeat like acoustic pop rock song. And
yeah, I
when
noticed that there was
to
quite a shift throughout various points of it.
when I first listened to the song, I was like, what? Like, how can someone think of this? How can someone put this on an album and be and just have that quality of, yeah, this is something that I thought of and intended, but it feels
It's
so...
called drugs, Jack. It's called cocaine.
It's just
you
so
you
good.
know what the answer is.
It's so good, though. I love this album, and I love this song, and one last thing this is probably the last thing I'll personally bring up about this album, is that I love the influences of this album. This album has so many very interesting little I
Like a
want to
callback
say
to another
Easter
artist.
eggs, but yeah, it's like, for instance, there are multiple songs that have like a bossa nova influence, and I love that.
Yeah, you sent me one of his songs that you said was very bossa nova. I don't think it was one of these, though.
Well, it is actually a bonus track of this record, which I actually do lump in with the record.
You see, I just listened to the 13 original track listing.
Yeah, and that's okay too. The song is called Lazy, and it has like just a totally bossa nova chord progression, and then halfway through it starts like devolving into an experimental electronic cluster with like an LFO of a synth going on and making it completely random and atonal in notes, and that's like right up my alley.
I know it's right up your alley, and it's starting to get up my alley, at least the bossa nova side of it. You really got me hooked on some bossa nova, so whenever you did send me that Cornelius song, I remember enjoying it.
Oh yeah, I'm very glad to hear that. But I don't know about you, but if you don't have any other points to make, I think we can move on.
You pretty much summed up whatever I had left.
Yeah, cool. All right, so the song I'm going to be picking is probably going to be New Music Machine. So here it is.
If not, we'll fix that in editing.
Yeah, I'll just say, this is the
Instead
next
of
song.
New Music Machine, you just redact that and have like Microsoft Text to Speech come over and say the right song.
He means something like this. New Music Machine.
Welcome back from the break, everybody. That was New Music Machine by Cornelius. If Jax chooses something differently, he'll do a Microsoft text-to-speech over what I just said and correct it. So
Even though I played New Music Machine, I'm still going to put this based and Fagen pilled meme in here.
So the last album that we're going to be discussing on this episode, in the Obscure section, it's one that Jack and I had both listened to when we first started getting into obscure music quite a few years ago. And we both liked it at the time because we thought, oh, this is weird, so it's cool. And the themes of it flew over our heads, and we were both texting each other before this episode and saying, I'm getting a completely new perspective on this album, right, Jack?
Yeah, we had spoken right before this episode about, I guess, our new impressions of this album. And I listened to this album at a time when I was... I had gone through my metal phase, and I was just getting more into prog. And I had actually heard of this album before I even got into prog because I was a fan of Opeth. And their third album.
Well, we haven't mentioned it yet. This album is called First Utterance by Comus.
Oh, yeah. That's a good idea. First Utterance by Comus.
Well, I'm glad you brought up Opeth because I was going to do that. Go for it.
Yeah, so their third album is called My Arms, Your Hers, and that takes its title from the song Drip Drip, if I'm not mistaken. And while Opeth has a definitely distinct and different sound, I can kind of hear the roots of what Opeth is all about in this album. After listening to this album for the first time back when I was just getting into prog, I was like, this is weird, this is cool, but I didn't really think much of it. Like, no, I thought it was just I don't want to say novelty, but I also thought it was just something I would listen to and kind of forget about. But after listening to it again, this album has some seriously unique and very, very cool qualities about it.
Yeah, whether it be the music itself or the themes. So this album, from the cover alone, the cover artwork was drawn with a ballpoint pen by the lead singer of the band, and it's one of the most demented album covers I've ever seen. I love it. It is this malnourished, creepy, I don't know if it's a person, I don't know if it's some other beast, but it's like bent and contorted, and its face is agonized. It has a tear rolling down its cheek. It's insane looking at this cover, and then if you open the gatefold, it's this beautiful color painting by the guitarist. So the album art alone is enough to say this album is just completely all different kinds of ways of screwed up. But the actual themes that it touches on, they're extremely dark. It deals with violence, it deals with rape, it deals with electroshock therapy, and the treatment of prisoners by government. It's an extremely dark album. And then you get to the actual music, which is this progressive folk psychedelic mixture with acoustic guitars, violins, flute. They have these beautiful female harmonies. And then the darker songs on the album, I don't know how else to describe it, except this would be the soundtrack to like a pagan witch gathering or something in the middle of the woods around a bonfire. It's something else entirely.
Yeah, I was definitely going to say this album sounds witchy. It sounds as if, exactly what you said, it's very atmospheric in a very horror and ritualistic kind of way. It's very dark, and I think the themes that are discussed in the lyrics have a lot to do with the general sound of the album. It just sounds like it would be that creepy and that horrifying. It's a very, very interesting record in terms of the just everything. And one thing I wanted to bring up is that this album is considered like progressive rock, but when you listen to it, it isn't really progressive rock.
No, like there's no really electric guitar. The most that they have is a bass.
Yeah, the bass is actually really, really cool in this album. It's very prevalent, and it kind of ties this folky and witchy sound together. But you also do hear similar things to like I guess what another prog artist at the time in the UK. I mentioned them last episode, Jade Warrior. Like you can kind of hear some similar things that they were doing. You can kind of hear some similar things. Like, I hear Jethro Tull a little bit here and there.
Yeah,
but I think this album does that in such an atmospheric way that you can't even really compare this album to those, because the way in which it's presented and the fabric in which you listen to it is totally different.
Yeah. At least for me, I can't think of a single album I can really remotely compare it to. Pretty much everything is, this is Jethro Tull from hell. This is some other band that sounds like it, just completely demented and all kinds of messed up. It's such a disturbingly dark, both thematically and musically. It's a very dark album, and it's beautiful in that way. Like, the album opens with a song called Diana, which is about a woman running through the woods trying to escape a rapist, and she gets raped in the woods. And that's what opens the album. And then you go into this song called The Herald, which is full of these acoustic passages and these beautiful female harmonies. And it does that again with Drip Drip, where it gets extremely dark.
Yeah.
This is such a roller coaster of themes. And as messed up as it is, I cannot get enough of this album.
It's very... Yeah, it has the same allure as a very dark horror movie, but in a way that's also very beautiful. And the juxtaposition between the very dark lyrics and then the sometimes beautiful passages of music is just, it's a very, very unique sound. And also, I want to mention, I love the female vocalist on this album.
Yeah.
She has a very unique voice, and it's kind of reminds me of Kate Bush here and there.
It kind of does.
And then you also have the lead vocalist, who sounds like absolutely demented.
Because he'll sing normally every once in a while, and then his voice will start getting worse and worse. Like, I believe it's on Drip Drip, where he says, "This will be your last communion. I'll be gentle, I'll be gentle, I'll be gentle." And as he says it, his voice gets higher and higher and more distorted and more distorted. That is such a cool effect he does with his voice.
Yeah. There's a band, that's a recent band, and they've actually gained traction in, the more obscure music community, and they're called Black Midi. And the vocalist for that band sounds a lot like some of the weirder portions of this album. The vocalists, I'm not sure. I can't tell you whether or not it's a direct influence, but it definitely sounds like it would be, based on what I've heard from Black Midi, and also based on listening to this album quite a few times, which is really cool. I have them
pulled up in a separate tab. I'll have to listen to them after this for comparison. But back to First Utterance. There's one thing I wanted to mention that's extremely interesting. The band members studied in the same school of music as David Bowie. And Bowie heard what the lead singer of the band was doing, and Bowie actually brought Comus onto one or two of his shows at local pubs. And
really?
And had them as a kind of an opening act. And I believe this album came out in 1971, so I think that was around the time that Bowie was doing like Honky Dory and all that. I don't think he had done Ziggy Stardust yet, but he was kind of turning that way.
Yeah. I didn't know that. That is really cool.
Yeah. So they had gotten kind of a bit of a famous voice behind them, but the album still failed commercially, which is why original vinyl copies are worth almost $1,000.
Yeah.
They're worth a lot of money, but it's one of the most unique albums, I think, to ever come out of the 70s. And I'm originally, for this episode of the podcast, I was going to do the soundtrack to Sorcerer by Tangerine Dream. And I'm glad you talked me out of it, because I was going to do First Utterance within the next one or two episodes after this. And when you said, you know what, let's save a soundtrack for one of our soundtrack-specific episodes, I thought, you know what, he's right. Let's do First Utterance. I haven't listened to it in a while. My eyes and ears were just completely opened up to this album. I don't know what it was that was stopping me from appreciating it for the depth that it has when I listened to it when I was in college.
Yeah, I could not tell you what I disliked about it, or not what I disliked about it, because I can't say I ever disliked it. But what I mean is that I never had the affinity for it that I now find that I do.
Yeah, and I was the same way. I saw this album in a completely new light, and I have so much more respect for it than I did before. Like I said earlier, you and I were both before like, oh, this is weird. That makes it cool. And then you look at it now and you're like, wow, this is extremely dark yet beautiful at the same time. That's what makes it good.
Yeah, for sure.
Man, well, I think we got everything we could on this album. You have any more comments?
I have no other comments, but I'm interested to hear which song you pick.
I'm going to have to think about that one. So for this song, or for this, to close out this section, I think I want to go with the song
Drip Drip.
We'll pick up from there. All right, we'll be back from the break in a second to go for our ratings.
Shall I cut you down? Yes, 'twould be a last physical communion. I'll be gentle, 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 I'll be
Alright, welcome back from the break. That was from the album First Utterance by Comus. And so now we get into the part of the show where we rate things. We rate the albums that we chose. So the first album that was discussed today was OK Computer. And now, as I said, this album is very, very good. It was probably one of my favorites of, I want to say, not last year, but the year before, because that's when I really started getting into it. And it still has a pretty special place in my heart. It's an album that it did take time for me to warm up to, but once it did, it really connected with me. So I'm personally going to say my rating after Mike gives his.
Oh, man, you really had to do me like that, didn't you? So, unlike a couple of other albums we've done on this podcast where, I said, this is a rating I'm going to give it. I appreciate what it was, but personally, it wasn't my cup of tea. This album was more to my liking than a lot of the others that we've done, at least that you've recommended that I hadn't really listened to before. It had a major cultural impact on the music scene in Britain at the time period, but at the same time, it didn't do anything I necessarily didn't enjoy. There are a lot of progressive rock themes that I enjoyed in this album, while still sounding a little more raw and kind of blunt, if you will, like some of those 90s albums can be, where the themes in OK Computer are still very deep and thought out, but they're delivered with a very effective and I didn't mean blunt. They're efficient, if you will. They're very effective and efficient in their delivery. So I think overall, I'm going to give OK Computer a 9.1.
Oh, wow.
What'd you think I was going to give it?
I didn't know what you were going to give it, but 9.1 is also my rating.
Oh, is that the first time we've actually gotten the same? No, in The Land of Grey and Pink, we both gave a 9.7.
Yes.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
Looks like we're finally starting to get some stuff right.
Oh man, I didn't expect you to have the same exact rating I had.
Man,
wow.
Look at
very
us.
Cool.
No more fighting.
Right.
Very cool. Speaking of very cool, we're about to be very cool, very based, very Fagen-pilled, if you will.
We couldn't go one episode without saying it.
Just for an explanation, instead of being red-pilled, if you're like aware of your surroundings, you're cultured, you're very intelligent, you're Fagen-pilled if you're very musically cultured.
Yes.
That's something
Fagen-pilled.
stupid that Jack and I say to each other because we both share a collective like 3 brain cells. I think one of them is always drunk.
That's very accurate.
Very accurate. Anyway, so yeah, The Nightfly, like I said, it's become my second favorite album of all time. It's everything I loved about Steely Dan, but because Fagen was no longer working under that Steely Dan name, he was able to bring his personality into it 110%. And what ended up happening from those sessions ended up being what I think is one of the most personal albums ever recorded. One that I feel the bookends on the album alone are enough to give this a 10 out of 10. And then you have everything else in the middle where I know you have a few things to pick at with Ruby Baby and Maxine. I personally enjoy them, and I don't really have a problem with them. There's honestly not a thing about Nightfly I would change, so I'm going to give it a 10. Shocker.
I wasn't shocked, but yeah, I was shocked at how much I personally enjoyed this album, as I said before.
Hell, I was shocked too.
I like it a lot more than Steely Dan's, or anything I've ever heard by Steely Dan, especially Asia. So that being said, I did say that the tracks 3 and 4, Ruby Baby and Maxine, could be better. Right. That's still an opinion of mine that I think holds up, no matter how many times I listen to the record. However, everything else is so impressionable to me. I love just about everything else on this album as much as I can. So for that reason, I'm probably gonna. I've been iffy on the score. The score has changed quite a bit.
Oh boy. Drum
I'm
roll,
probably
everybody.
gonna give it a 9.2.
Really?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
I'm probably gonna give it a 9.2.
Make me ugly cry. No, I was expecting you to give it a 9.1 or a 9.
Yeah.
Because I knew
9.2.
a while back when I finally peer pressured and bullied you into listening to it, you said you would give it a 9, and I thought that's what it would be. If not, bump it up to a 9.1. But a 9.2, I'm impressed.
Yeah.
Very Fagen-pilled, Jack. Very Fagen-pilled indeed.
And if you take it by ranking, I just ranked this album higher than OK Computer. So
yeah, I'm kind of in disbelief. You ranked my choice over your own.
Yeah, I did.
Damn, that's impressive.
Yeah, well, you chose a good one this week. So.
Have I not chosen a good one before? Is that what you're saying?
I can't say the same about Stevie Ray Vaughan.
Okay, no, don't you even start. Go on to Fantasma. Don't you start with me, boy.
All right. So my obscure pick for the week was Fantasma by Cornelius, which is an absolute trip. It's a complete, it's a ride. It's from start to finish, very immersive. It's an immersive experience, very lush, very abrasive at times, but also beautiful.
Yep.
And for all these reasons, I would say that it is definitely come to be one of my favorite albums, definitely within the realm of, I can't give it an exact number, but it's very good to me. So I've been thinking it over, and I would probably rate this album a 9.5 or a 9.6.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well,
I'd say 9.5
where we're
for now.
keeping track of all our scores, so I'm just going to put it down as a 9.55 for now. That'll be close.
Just do
enough.
9.5. I'll stick with
9.5?
9.5.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, if you want to change it, let me know.
Well, remember, we're going to do that episode in the future where we go back and see if our ratings stayed the same or not.
Yeah. Oh, man. I got to think about at what point we're going to do that. That'll be a long episode.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, so on to the last rating. So, First Utterance by Comus. I'm so glad that you changed my mind on doing Tangerine Dream and wanted to do Comus instead. I'm still just kind of at a loss with this album. Not in the sense that, wow, I really don't know what to think of that. That was terrible. No, from the sense of I've come to a much greater appreciation of the themes within the album compared to like a couple of years ago when I was just getting into obscure stuff. And I said I loved it. This is one of those albums where if I gave a list of my favorite obscure albums, I would put it on there mainly because of the cover. Kind of like Barbed Wire Sandwich by Black Cat Bones. Kind of like Growers of Mushroom by Leafhound.
Mm-hmm.
The more I listened to it, though, leading up to this episode, the more I just truly appreciated the sheer brilliance of these musicians whenever they made this album. And I kind of want to give my score first, but I kind of want to hear what you have to say first before I give my score.
All right. Let's see. This is probably the one that I spent the most time thinking about the score. So what I think about this album is that exactly what you've been saying. It's such an interesting thing to look back on an album that you had listened to a long time ago and feel something completely and utterly different. Which I think that after listening to this album as of recently, I would definitely rank it like pretty highly in terms of obscure taste and my taste in general, because it has aligned a lot more with what I seek for in music now than it ever has before. So that being said, I'm probably going to give it I'll say for now, a 9.1. And then I will probably listen to the album even more, because keep in mind, I listened to The Nightfly like 25 times. And then that's
those are
where
rookie
I got my
numbers,
rating.
dude. We need to get those up.
And yeah, so this is probably my fourth listen ever of First Utterance, and that is my score right now, a 9.1 or 9.1.
So for me, I listened to it quite a fair bit a few years ago, and it never really struck me until I listened to it before the podcast. And I listened to it a couple of times last week. I listened to it a couple of times today. I did listen to it over the weekend when I was driving to a Super Bowl party, and my friend lives in one of the more rural parts of my state. And so I had this album on when I'm driving down this lone road with trees towering on all sides of me. And that really added to the atmosphere. But I've been thinking about this a lot, and oh no, I'm kind of scared to say it. I think I'm going to give First Utterance a 10.
Whoa!
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
Two 10s in one episode?
Yeah, I know. And I abused you for wanting to do that. I didn't think I was going to do that when I said I wanted to do this album on this episode. I really wasn't expecting to give it a 10. But the more I look back on it, I don't think there's anything else like this that I've really listened to. And I'm going to give it a 10.
Jeez.
That was quite a shocker, huh? Oh,
Mike.
He used the full name. No Mike, just Michael.
Oh my God. I was not expecting that. I was really not expecting that. Wow.
I knew it was going to catch you
Wow.
off guard because I was originally going to give it like a 9.4. And as I was listening to it this morning, part of me was like, could you imagine if I gave it a 10? He would have a stroke at his computer. And I kept thinking, what if I gave it a 10?
Lo and behold.
I really think it is worthy of a 10. And I don't think there's another obscure album besides In the Land of Grey and Pink that I would rank close to that.
Wow. Yikes.
Big yikes.
That's not a good thing for the future of my obscure choices.
Uh-oh. Wait, have we given an obscure album a 10? No, we have not.
What was that?
No, you gave Deceit a 10.
And I gave... Yeah, I did give Deceit
That's the
a
only
10.
obscure we've given a 10.
Really?
So, yeah.
Man, I gotta change that.
Oh, no. Yeah, the closest
actually-
that we've had is Walpurgis, I gave an 8.7. Long Season, you gave a 9.8 and an 8.8. And then, yeah.
I am going to definitely retrospectively change that Long Season rating to a 10. Like, I know this is total spoiler alert.
No, I knew you were going to.
I've listened to Long Season so many times now that I just feel it's like a part of me. It's like a part of my soul. It's so beautiful.
Yeah, and I probably need to listen to it more. And the same things kind of happened with me in Gets Gilberto.
Mm-hmm.
I know I'm going
Gets
to rank
Gilberto.
it higher.
I'm excited to I'm excited to do this retrospective episode eventually.
Eventually,
can,
somewhere down the line.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see when that happens. But anyway, I guess that is it for this episode.
Yeah, quite a shock.
Yeah, I
think the highest ranking episode we've had.
Averaging everything that we've ranked in the episode, yeah, I really think it is, and especially you giving 2 10s, it's like, you know.
Yeah, I know. Now I have no room to talk if you do it.
Yeah.
That's the thing. I was never expecting to give it a 10 out of 10 last week before I started listening to it again, and then for some reason something finally clicked in that head of mine that made me think, wow, this is truly something special.
Yeah. I definitely, I can understand that for sure. But anyway, I think that that just about sums everything up. So
yes, it does. And
yeah,
I'm
hope
glad that we're finally returning
listening
to our normal schedule.
Yeah, it feels good. But yeah, I hope everyone listening enjoyed the podcast. We had some pretty cool discussions.
Yes.
Make sure to stay tuned and listen to the Obscurity Spectrum podcast.
Yep. Well, hopefully you maintain our regular schedule. Hopefully.
Yep. Yeah.
Things work out.
We'll see.
We'll see. Well, this is Mike signing off.
This is Jack signing off.
Crud, we interrupted each other.
This
is Mike signing off, and
this is Jack signing off.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Perfect. All right. See y'all next week, guys.